My parents disowned me for joining the military until the president saluted me by name in front of the nation. The cameras flashed like summer lightning, but I didn't flinch. My spine was straight, boots polished, uniform pressed. I had practiced every movement, every breath, for this moment. But nothing could have prepared me for the sound of the President of the United States saying my name not from a list. Not as a formality, but with intention, with reverence. "Sergeant Emma Lewis," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "for extraordinary bravery under enemy fire, for saving the lives of 18 U.S. personnel at great personal risk, and for gathering intelligence that led to the rescue of American hostages. The nation thanks you." And then he saluted me. Not a casual nod, not a polite handshake. A full military salute, crisp, sharp, and deliberate. The president saluted me. In that instant, I forgot the ache in my leg, the scar beneath my dress uniform, the phantom weight of a fallen comrade's body that still haunted my sleep. I forgot the sound of gunfire in the Afghan mountains, the biting cold of dawn when we waited for extraction. I even forgot the subtle, constant silence of my parents, the void where love was supposed to be, until I looked down. Seated in the third row, just behind the military dignitaries and senators, were my parents, my father, Dr. Michael Lewis, respected neurosurgeon, keynote speaker at countless medical conventions, author of 2 books on cognitive resilience, a man whose approval once dictated the temperature of my entire world. Next to him, my mother, Dr. Caroline Lewis, clinical professor of internal medicine, research director for a major Boston hospital, her jaw clenched, her arms stiff in her lap. Not pride, not shame. Something in between, like witnessing a stranger being celebrated when you expected to see your reflection on that stage. They had told me once firmly, coolly, that if I joined the military, I was no longer their daughter, that I would be throwing away everything they had built. Everything they had sacrificed for. They hadn't spoken to me since the day I left for basic training. 3 years ago. Now, here they were. And the nation had shown up to honor what they chose to forget. As the applause filled the East Room of the White House, I scanned the crowd of civilians, soldiers, families, and press. Everyone stood. My parents stood too, but only because protocol demanded it. I didn't cry. I didn't blink. I only stood there, one hand raised in return salute, the other clenched around a folded speech I had no intention of reading. That speech, carefully written, full of gratitude and humility, remained unopened in my pocket. I didn't need to speak. The truth had already been spoken. As the ceremony ended, the president walked down the line of honorees, shaking hands, whispering words only meant for us. When he reached me, he looked at my nameplate for just a second and smiled. "Those 2 in the third row," he said quietly, tilting his head subtly toward my parents. They looked surprised. I nodded, unsure what to say. He paused, then added, "Some people need a room full of strangers to see what they refuse to see at home." And just like that, he moved on. His words didn't hurt. They landed like truth, heavy, precise, undeniable. After the reception, as the crowd dispersed, photographers called for group shots. Generals shook my hand. A boy in a wheelchair, maybe 10 years old, reached out and gave me a homemade card with crayon stars and bold letters that said, "You are a hero." And then, as I turned to leave, I heard her voice. "Emma." I froze. I hadn't heard my mother say my name in warned. "You're 93 days." I knew, because I had counted every one of them. I turned slowly. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "We had no idea." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because it wasn't about what they didn't know. It was about what they never bothered to ask. Instead, I gave a polite nod and walked past them, out the ornate doorway, down the grand hallway lined with American flags, each step lighter than the last. Outside, a cool breeze cut through the warm April sun. My team was waiting. The ones who bled beside me. The ones who didn't need a ceremony to believe in me. Staff Sergeant Devlin clapped me on the shoulder. "Told you they'd choke on their silence." Corporal Jennings handed me a cold soda. "Wanna head to O'Malley's? First round's on the guy with the Purple Heart." I laughed, a real one this time. Not because I was finally recognized, not because my family showed up, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't need them to. Subscribe for more stories where silence speaks louder than words. I was born in the kind of house where achievement wasn't celebrated, it was expected. A 3-story colonial home just outside Boston, with a white wraparound porch, boxwood hedges trimmed like chess pieces, and a doorbell that chimed like a string quartet. Inside, it was a cathedral of intellect. The shelves were lined not with novels or family pictures, but medical journals, framed diplomas, and awards behind glass. The walls bore portraits of ancestors in academic robes, great-grandfathers who founded clinics, grandmothers who pioneered surgical techniques. Even the doormat seemed to whisper, "You better become someone." My earliest memories weren't bedtime stories or cartoons. They were lectures. I remember being 5, sitting at the kitchen table while my mother, dressed in scrubs and speaking through a Bluetooth headset, pointed at a diagram of the human heart and asked me, "Do you remember what this valve is called?" "Emma." "Aortic," I answered. She nodded but didn't smile. "Say it clearly. You might be a speaker one day." At 6, my father bought me a child-sized lab coat. At 7, I was reading medical case studies instead of fairy tales. At 8, I was enrolled in STEM summer camps. At 9, they bought me a microscope and expected me to use it. I wasn't allowed to join Girl Scouts because my parents believed extracurriculars should serve your future, not your social life. Piano lessons, only because it was good for cognitive development. Every decision, every hour of my childhood, was optimized like a business strategy, and it wasn't just me. My older brother, Andrew, was the model of perfection. By 13, he had already co-authored a research paper with our mother. At 16, he interned at our father's hospital. At 18, he was admitted to Harvard pre-med with a letter of recommendation from the Dean of Medicine, who also happened to be our uncle. He walked through life like a golden boy in a glass box, clean, precise, unbreakable. I was different. I liked the outdoors. I liked movement. I liked stories, not case studies. I drew battle scenes on the back of my science worksheets. I pretended to be a rescue medic saving lives in the mud, not a neurosurgeon in a sterile theater. My parents thought it was a phase, a cute little rebellion that would fade by puberty. It didn't. The more they pushed, the more I pulled. By middle school, I was hiding action novels under my textbooks, sneaking into the garage to do pull-ups on the doorframe, joining a secret online forum for women in the military under a fake name. Of course. But I still performed. I got straight A's. I joined the debate team. I won a scholarship to Stanford's biomedical science track. I gave the valedictorian speech at graduation. And yet none of it felt like mine. It felt like a role I was playing. The good daughter role. The future doctor role. Every step I took up their ladder, the more I realized it wasn't leaning against my wall. Still, I tried. Because when your entire identity is built around approval, you don't want to see what happens when it disappears. There's this photo my parents love, a framed image that sat above the mantel. Me, age 10, in a pristine lab coat, standing beside my brother in an operating room simulation at a hospital open day. He's holding a scalpel. I'm holding a clipboard. We're both smiling. But if you look closely, and I mean really closely, you'll notice I'm not smiling with my eyes. I wasn't looking at the camera. I was looking past it out the window, toward the ROTC recruiters setting up their tent in the parking lot. That window became symbolic to me. A frame inside a frame. A future inside a future. I remember once asking my mother what she would do if I didn't want to become a doctor. We were driving home from another academic awards banquet. I had just won first place in a biology quiz bowl. She didn't look at me. She just said, "That's not funny." It wasn't a joke. It was a plea. But in our house, deviation wasn't tolerated, it was corrected. And correction came in the form of silence, disappointment, or withdrawal of affection. No raised voices, no slammed doors. Just long, cold pauses, like you had failed an invisible test and didn't even know which question you got wrong. The pressure came with a smile. "You're lucky," my friends would say. "Your parents care so much about your future." But love that only exists when you succeed isn't love. It's performance-based affection. And I was running out of breath. By the time I reached 18, I knew two things. I was good at following orders. I hated the ones I'd been given. That summer, I told them I was taking a gap year before Stanford, that I needed perspective. They nodded, assuming it meant a travel internship or a research assistantship. Instead, I drove to a military recruitment office. There, I met Sergeant Rachel Holtz, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice. She didn't ask about my GPA. She asked why I was there. I said, I want to earn something that's mine. She slid a pamphlet across the desk and said, then earn your boots? My brother Andrew was never meant to wear a uniform. At least, that's what everyone thought. He had the perfect life. Harvard pre-med, honors every semester. Already accepted into Johns Hopkins for his M.D. Ph.D. dual program. My parents talked about him like he was an extension of their legacy. Not a person, a promise fulfilled. But something shifted after his third year. He stopped smiling in photos. He stayed up all night reading military memoirs. He dropped out of medical school during his residency without warning and enlisted in the Marine Corps. Why would you throw everything away? My father demanded. Andrew didn't answer. He just said, I want to do something real. For the first time in our lives, I saw fear in my mother's eyes. Not fear for his safety, fear that the perfect image would crack, that their golden boy was trading in white coats for camouflage. They didn't speak to him for months, but I did. He called me the night before deployment. I was still at Stanford, studying late in the dorm library. The call came through at 2. Garzia. Emma, he said. Don't do it their way. Not if it's not yours. I told him I didn't know what my way was. That's okay, he said. Just make sure when you find it, you run like hell toward it. He laughed that dry, knowing laugh only siblings share. Then he added something that stuck with me ever since. Don't wait until you lose everything to become yourself. 6 months later, we received the news. The kind of knock on the door you see in movies. 2 uniformed officers, hands folded, expressions unreadable. Andrew had been killed during a reconnaissance mission in northern Syria. An IED. Instant. No suffering. They said, no chance to say goodbye. My parents didn't cry at first. They froze. My mother walked upstairs and closed the door. My father sat down in his office and stared at Andrew's Harvard diploma. No one spoke. The silence in the house was so loud it echoed. I was the one who handled the details: the funeral, the phone calls, the obituary. I requested to accompany the body home from Dover Air Force Base. My parents refused to go. We can't see him like that, my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. So I went, alone, at the base. I was escorted to a private room where the casket had been draped in the American flag. There was a chaplain, a young Marine, and a folded letter addressed to the Lewis family. I stood there, my hand resting on the cold, polished wood, and whispered, "You found your way, didn't you?" That night, I sat with his squad mates at a local diner near the base. They told me stories. How Andrew had pulled a wounded interpreter to safety while under sniper fire. How he used his medical training to save a fellow Marine from bleeding out after an ambush. How he used to talk about me, the smarter Lewis. He'd joke. They said he was brave, relentless, quiet, steady. One of them, a corporal named Jenkins, leaned in and said, "Your brother." He was the guy everyone wanted beside them when it got ugly. I realized I had never seen that version of Andrew. Not once. Because my parents had crafted a version of him they could control. The real one was forged in the dirt, not in the lecture hall. I flew home the next morning. The funeral was private, tasteful, and sterile. My parents invited only immediate family and their closest colleagues. The eulogy mentioned Harvard, Johns Hopkins, academic excellence. Not one word about his unit, not one about courage. No medals were displayed. I wore the Marine Corps pin his squad gave me. My mother asked me to take it off before the ceremony. It's not appropriate. I left it on. As we lowered the casket into the ground, my father turned to me and whispered, "Promise me you won't follow him." I didn't answer, because the truth was, I already knew I would, back at home. I found Andrew's old journal tucked behind the books in our shared childhood bookshelf. Inside were sketches of battle formations, quotes from books on courage, and one page I've never forgotten. It read, "I became what I feared, and it gave me peace." When you give yourself to something bigger, the weight shifts. You stop carrying your family's expectations. You start carrying your own. That night, I made 2 copies of the journal. One I returned to its place. The other I packed in my duffel bag. 3 weeks later, I walked into the same recruiting office he had and signed my name. My parents didn't come to see me off. No hugs, no tears, no good lucks, just silence. But for once, I welcomed it, because in that silence, I had finally made a choice of my own. It was a Wednesday night. Rain drummed steadily against the kitchen window, soft but insistent, like the universe was whispering, "Brace yourself." We were seated around the table like any other weeknight. Roasted chicken, asparagus with lemon zest, wine glasses filled with something imported and expensive. Everything immaculate, everything normal. Except for me, my heart was racing. I had rehearsed the words in my head for hours. I could hear Andrew's voice in my memory. "If you wait for the right moment to be brave, it'll never come." I waited until the plates had been cleared and my mother stood to serve dessert. "I have something to say." She froze mid-step, holding the dessert spoon like a scalpel. My father looked up from his phone. "Yes." I took a breath. "I've joined the military." Silence. The kind that makes the air heavier, the room colder. My mother blinked. "What?" "I enlisted last week. I ship out for basic in 3 weeks." She set the spoon down gently, as if afraid it might break. "You're joking," my father said. Not asked. Stated. Dismissed. "I'm not." He stared at me, eyes narrowing. "Why would you do that?" I swallowed. "Because I want to serve. Because it feels right. Because I want something that's mine." "That's nonsense," he snapped. "Standing now. You have everything. A full ride to Stanford. A path to real purpose. This is purpose. Real purpose doesn't involve guns and dirt." He spat. "It involves saving lives, not wasting them. I'll be a medic." "That doesn't change anything." My mother still hadn't spoken. Her hands trembled as she reached for a napkin, folded and unfolded it again and again, like she could smooth out the moment. Then she finally looked at me. "We already lost one child to this madness," she said quietly. "You'd put us through that again." "I'm not Andrew." "No, you're not," she whispered. "He was brilliant, focused. You always followed feelings." I nodded slowly. "And those feelings are why I'm doing this." My father walked to the cabinet, poured himself a second glass of wine. His back to me, he said, "If you do this, don't come back." The words were ice. And yet, they didn't shatter me. Not this time. "I'm not asking for permission," I said. "Just telling you before I go." He turned around, glass in hand. "You want struggle, pain. Go ahead, but don't expect sympathy when it breaks you." I didn't answer, because he was wrong. It wouldn't break me. It would rebuild me. After that night, I became a ghost in my own house. No one spoke at breakfast. No one asked when I was leaving. No one packed a bag or offered a ride. My mother left pamphlets for alternative programs on my desk: nursing fellowships, global health internships. I didn't touch them. My father left a letter on my pillow. It said, "You are throwing away your future for a fantasy built on grief. We will not endorse this. Do not write. Do not call. No signature. Just that." On the morning of my departure, I stood in the foyer, duffel bag at my feet, boots laced tight. I waited 10 minutes. No one came down. I left the key on the counter and walked out the door. No wave, goodbye. No hug. Not even a sliver of curtain drawn back from the upstairs window. Just the rain again, steady and calm. At the bus terminal, I sat beside a kid named Malik, 19, from Detroit, wearing a second-hand coat and 2 thin shoes. He offered me a pack of gum and said, "First time." I nodded. He grinned. "Me too. My mom cried so hard this morning. I thought she was going to chain herself to the bus." I smiled politely. I didn't tell him that no one even knew I was gone. As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window, half hoping even against logic that I'd see my father's car in the distance. or my mother running with a letter, or even just a glimpse of their faces at the gate. There was nothing, just gray skies, just asphalt, just forward. And it was enough, in that moment. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living under their shadow. I was stepping into something terrifying not because of war, or training, or sacrifice, but because I had chosen it, and no one could take it away from me. They say basic training strips you down before it builds you up. They're right. The first week felt like dying in slow motion, only to wake up and do it again. Every single day. No names, just numbers. No comfort, just commands. Drill sergeants didn't care if I was top of my class at Stanford. They didn't care if I came from a family of doctors. They cared if I could run 5 miles in the dark without collapsing. If I could carry 80 pounds on my back. If I could keep moving when my lungs screamed for mercy. And I did, but not because I was the strongest. Because I was too stubborn to be the weakest. The first time I fell was during the obstacle course. It was raining. The rope wall was slick. My boots slipped halfway up, and I hit the ground hard. Wind knocked out. Mud in my mouth. I felt the shame creep in the voice in my head saying, "You're not made for this. You're soft." They were right. But then I heard another voice. "On your feet, Lewis. You're not dead yet." It was Drill Sergeant Knox, a barrel-chested man with eyes like steel and a voice that could break bricks. He didn't offer a hand. He offered expectation. I got up, climbed again, reached the top, and when I looked down, I didn't feel fear. I felt earned. By the second week, my body had stopped complaining. The bruises became routine. The blisters hardened into calluses, and the screaming, the relentless screaming from instructors started sounding like rhythm, like music, like purpose. We moved in formation, ate in under 5 minutes, slept like corpses and rose like machines. Some recruits cracked, some cried. One girl quit by week 3, but I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, because I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't just running from something, I was running towards something. Combat medic training was another beast. We trained under simulated fire, practiced applying tourniquets blindfolded, injected IVs in moving vehicles, treated casualties screaming in blood-soaked gear, surrounded by smoke and chaos. Failure wasn't theoretical. It was measured in seconds. You either saved the life or you didn't. I failed a drill once. My patient bled out because I hesitated on the airway. I sat alone after class, fists clenched, replaying every step I got wrong. Corporal Torres, a second-year trainee, found me there. "You're not God, Lewis," she said. "You're just a medic." But a good medic doesn't freeze. A good medic moves. Then she handed me her old field notes, pages covered in scribbled anatomy sketches, trauma flowcharts, and one phrase in all caps. "Trust your training. Trust your team." That became my mantra. I stayed late, studied harder, practiced more. I stopped chasing perfection and started chasing readiness. And something strange began to happen. My body changed leaner, tougher, but my mind changed more. I stopped missing home, stopped needing a message that would never come, because I had found a new version of family. The guy who gave me the last protein bar on a 15-mile hike. The girl who covered for me when I puked from heat exhaustion. The squad leader who said, "You're stronger than you think, Doc." They didn't know my last name's weight. They didn't care. They just cared if I showed up, bled with them, and got the job done. The day we received our uniforms was unlike anything I had felt before. Not a graduation, not an award, not even my college acceptance letter could compare. When I put on the camouflage for the first time, real, not training gear, I looked in the mirror and didn't see the doctor's daughter or the girl who left Stanford. I saw me, earned, not inherited, built, not expected. After our formal oath ceremony, I stepped outside and called my parents. It rang once, then voicemail. "Hi, it's me, Emma. I just wanted you to know I made it. I'm officially a combat medic. I know you don't agree, and maybe you never will, but I'm proud of this. And I hope someday, maybe, you'll be proud of me too." Click. I never heard back. That night, my squad threw a graduation party in the rec hall. Malik brought root beer. Torres brought loud music. Someone found a cake that said, "We didn't die, congrats." We laughed, danced, told stories of our worst training moments and near failures. At one point, I stepped outside for air and looked up at the stars. It was the same sky that hung over Boston, but it felt different now. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just alive, I was living. The first time I wrote to them, I still believed they might respond. It was the night before my deployment. My duffel was packed. My dog tags rested on the nightstand beside a copy of my brother's old journal. My squad mates were asleep, exhausted from final drills and last-minute medical checks, but I was wide awake, heart pounding like a second clock inside my chest. I took out the stationery I had bought the week before. Crisp, white paper, nothing fancy, just clean. I wrote, "Dear Mom and Dad, I leave for my first tour tomorrow. I thought I'd feel scared, but mostly I feel steady, like I've trained for this my whole life and didn't know it. I wanted you to know that I made it through training, that I didn't quit, that I'm not running away. I'm running toward something, toward meaning, toward a version of myself I finally recognize. I hope you're well. I hope you're proud. Even if you don't say it, maybe someday, when this is all behind us, we'll talk again. Love, Emma." I folded the letter, sealed it, wrote their address in small, neat print, though I had it memorized since I was 5. I dropped it in the outbound mail slot and waited. A week passed, then 2, then a month. No reply. Maybe it got lost. I told myself, maybe they needed time. Maybe silence was just a delayed yes. So I wrote again and again. Short notes this time, updates, stories, hopes. We treated our first real trauma today. 2 locals, 1 soldier. I didn't panic. I stitched a wound in the back of a moving truck. We found a stray dog outside the wire. Torres named him Bravo. He sleeps next to my bunk now. Still, nothing. 3 months into deployment, I stopped checking the mail bin with hope. I just checked out of habit. Meanwhile, my squad mates received care packages, letters, Polaroids of kids, dogs, messy kitchens. One guy got a full lasagna vacuum sealed in layers of foil from his grandmother. They laughed, teased each other, passed around snacks and trinkets like treasure. Torres noticed me sitting alone one evening, watching them. "No one from home?" she asked gently. I shook my head. She didn't ask why, didn't press. The next day, she handed me a pack of gum, a pair of fuzzy socks, and a book of short stories, all unwrapped. "It's not a lasagna," she shrugged, "but it's something." I started saving the letters I wrote unmailed, pages folded into my journal, some angry, some hopeful, some just blank except for my name. It wasn't that I needed a response. I needed to believe someone, somewhere, might still care enough to read. One day, I got a package, my name, my unit, correctly labeled. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, a standard issue care package from a volunteer network, candy, socks, a prayer card, and a letter not from my family, but from a woman named Linda from Iowa. She had written, "Dear soldier, I don't know you, but I wanted you to know that someone is thinking about you. Thank you for your courage. You are not forgotten. Stay safe, Linda." I read it twice, then cried. Not because Linda knew me, but because she wanted to. By month 5, I stopped writing home entirely. I wrote to Linda instead. Told her about Bravo, about Malik's awful guitar playing, about Torres teaching me how to braid her hair the regulation way. She always wrote back, always signed it, "Love from the Heartland." That's when I realized something. Family isn't just who raises you. It's who shows up for you when you're bloody, bruised, and still standing. My parents had raised me, but my squad had kept me alive emotionally, and soon enough, literally, we had a saying in the barracks: we bleed together, or we don't bleed at all. And we meant it. When Bravo got sick, 4 of us took turns feeding him Pedialyte from a syringe. When Malik got injured during a vehicle rollover drill, we stayed up all night at the infirmary until he came to. When Torres learned her mother had cancer, I sat with her behind the tents while she screamed into the desert wind. We were each other's lifelines. The letters I never received were replaced by late-night jokes and shared cigarettes and quiet nods during bad days. I didn't miss home anymore, because I had built a new one. The last time I wrote to my parents was the week before we rotated out. One final try. Dear Mom and Dad, you don't have to forgive me or understand, but I need you to know I'm not lost. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I've stopped chasing approval. I'm chasing peace. I hope, wherever you are, you've found it too. Goodbye for now. Emma, I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. The first time I saw someone bleed out in front of me, it wasn't dramatic. There was no slow motion fall, no heroic last words, just a burst of sound, a gasp, and then blood, too much blood blooming across the front of a uniform like spilled paint on canvas. We were on patrol outside Fob Wallace, a dusty outpost in southern Afghanistan. Routine route clearance. I was in the third Humvee, wedged between Torres and Jenkins, listening to Malik hum something off-key when the blast hit. ID. Front vehicle, just a few feet ahead. Everything shook. My ears rang. Sand filled my mouth before I even realized we were on the ground. Medic. Medic. Voices were shouting. Panicked. Overlapping, but my body moved before my brain caught up. The world had narrowed to one thing. Sergeant Daniels, laid out beside the wreckage, half conscious and barely breathing. His leg was gone, shredded below the knee. Arterial spray, bright red, fast. Time was bleeding out as quickly as he was. My hands weren't shaking. They should have been, but they weren't. Tourniquet first, high and tight. Pressure dressing, morphine. Assess airway, stay calm. I heard Torres yelling over the comms, Jenkins covering with his rifle, Bravo barking wildly from somewhere behind. But my focus never left Daniels. Stay with me, I whispered, voice steady. Even when his eyes rolled back for a second, I slapped his face, hard. Stay with me. I got the bleeding under control. Airway clear. IV in. Morphine administered. Evac bird inbound. 15 minutes. They said, felt like 15 years. I stayed crouched beside him, one hand gripping his shoulder, the other on the pressure point above the tourniquet. His blood was in my boots, on my face, under my nails. I didn't flinch, because if I flinched, he died. When the helicopter finally touched down, I rode with him, held the IV bag over my head as we bounced through the air like dice in a cup. By the time we reached the trauma bay, he was still breathing. The nurse looked at me, wide-eyed. You're the reason he's still alive. I didn't answer. I just sat down on the concrete floor outside and threw up in a bucket. Then I stood up and went back to the squad. No one said much that night. We sat in a circle on sandbags, passing around a bag of stale chips and a warm energy drink. Someone made a joke about how my hands looked like I'd murdered someone. We laughed too loudly, too long. The kind of laugh that covers up everything you don't want to feel yet. Torres tossed a medallion at me, a small, metal badge shaped like a cross. You earned this, she said. First blood. First save. I kept it. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his breath shallow, rattling. Kept replaying the moment the tourniquet locked into place and the bleeding slowed. And for a second, a terrifying second, I wondered, what if I hadn't been fast enough? What if I failed next time? I went to the medical tent, practiced setting tourniquets on a dummy arm until my fingers cramped, ran airway drills with a flashlight in my mouth and Bravo curled up at my feet. At 4A, Torres found me there. You did good, she said, handing me a protein bar. You saved a life. I almost didn't. She sat beside me. Emma, we all almost don't. That's what makes us human. But you showed up. You acted. That's what makes you a medic. The next morning, Daniels woke up. Alive, leg gone, but alive. He asked who worked on him. Torres pointed to me. He looked me in the eye, lifted his hand weak, but deliberate, and whispered, Thanks. Doc. I nodded. Couldn't speak, because for the first time in my life, I had saved someone with nothing but my hands. Training, and, will, no grades, no awards, no family name, just me. And it was enough. Later that week, the CO called me in, said word of my actions had reached command, that I'd be put on the fast track for Combat Medic Certification Level 3, an accelerated promotion. He asked if I wanted to call home, tell them the news. I shook my head. They wouldn't pick up. He paused, then handed me a sealed envelope. Inside, a commendation letter, signed, stamped, official. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I needed the validation, but because I finally understood. I wasn't trying to prove them wrong anymore. I was proving myself right. That night, I wrote in my journal, "This is who I am now." Not because I chose pain, but because I chose to walk through it and keep going. I am not a disappointment. I am not broken. I am here, and I am enough. It started like any other patrol. The air was dry, the sun a white-hot coin in the sky, the kind of heat that made your bones ache before noon. We moved in a staggered formation down a narrow pass known as Red Alley, a winding canyon flanked by cliffs that looked like sleeping giants. Command said it was quiet. Command was wrong. The first explosion took out our rear vehicle. The second hit just ahead of the lead. Ambush. Gunfire erupted from both sides of the ridge, a wall of sound, like thunder with teeth. Dirt flew, shouts mixed with static. Radios crackled uselessly. Someone screamed. Bravo barked wildly, then vanished from sight. Take cover. I dove behind a boulder, dragging Jenkins by his vest. He'd taken shrapnel to the thigh, bleeding fast. Malik was down, unmoving. Torres was pinned near the wreckage. My mind split in two, one half processing chaos. The other drilling into the checklist burned into me through months of training. Assess, prioritize, treat, move. I reached Malik first. No pulse, no breath. Neck at the wrong angle. Gone. There was no time to mourn. I turned to Jenkins, tore open his pant leg, applied the tourniquet, checked for other wounds. He was conscious, gritting his teeth, eyes full of pain and something else, fear. Stay with me. I told him. I didn't ask. I ordered. Bullets hissed above. Dust stung my eyes. A fire ignited near the Humvee. Then I heard it. Taurus. Screaming. Lewis. I found her trapped beneath the twisted frame of the lead vehicle. Her leg was pinned. Blood poured from her scalp. She was trying and failing to keep pressure on her own wound. Doc, she gasped. Leave me. No. I crawled through smoke and debris, ignoring the ringing in my ears, the sting in my shoulder from flying metal. You're not dying in this canyon. I used a crowbar from the wreckage to lever the frame up just enough to slide her out. My arms screamed. My leg gave way under me, but I didn't stop. I dragged her behind the rocks, tore open my last field kit, and started working. You always wanted to see me panic, right? I muttered, trying to keep her awake. She smiled. Weak, bloody, never doubted you. Doc. Air support arrived 30 minutes later, an eternity. By then, I had stabilized Jenkins, stopped the bleeding in Torres's leg, and secured a splint using parts of my own pack. My hands were blistered. My ears still buzzed from the concussive blasts. But everyone still breathing was still breathing. We lost 3 that day. Malik, a rookie named Harper, and Bravo. I found his body hours later, curled beside the wreckage. He'd been shot once, clean, through the ribs, as if he'd tried to defend us. Even without understanding the war, I buried him myself. No ceremony. Just my hands in the dirt, my tears soaking the ground. Good boy, I whispered. You did your job. That night, the fire came from within. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My breath wouldn't come right. Torres had been medevaced. Jenkins, too. The barracks were too quiet, too heavy. I sat on my cot, alone, fingers digging into my own forearms as if pain might anchor me. Then I opened Andrew's journal and read the same line over and over again. The worst thing about surviving is that you still have to live. I wrote a letter I never sent. Dear Mom, today I watched someone I love bleed out. I watched someone else cry through the pain I couldn't fully stop. I buried a dog who saved my life more times than I can count. You always told me emotions were dangerous, that tears made you weak. But I'm crying now, and I've never felt stronger, because I didn't run, I didn't break, I stayed. I saved who I could. I faced the fire. I don't know if you'd be proud of that, but I am, Emma. I folded it, tucked it into Andrew's journal, and slept with it pressed against my chest like a shield. The next morning, Command called me in. You held the line. The CO said, you made the impossible survivable. He asked if I wanted to take leave. You've earned it, he said. You don't have to keep going. I looked him dead in the eye. If I don't keep going, who will? He nodded once, approved my request to stay. There's strength in knowing your breaking point, he said, and even more in choosing to stay just past it. That night, I made a promise. To the ones we lost, to the ones we saved, to myself, as long as I have breath, I will show up. I will not leave people behind. I will not need applause, or medals, or forgiveness, just the chance to try again tomorrow. The ceremony was brief. It took place inside the base operations tent, lit by dull fluorescence that hummed like anxious breath. Folding chairs, a sheet cake from the mess hall. No cameras, no fanfare. But when the commanding officer pinned the bronze star to my uniform, I felt nothing. Not pride, not joy, just weight. For heroic action under fire, he read aloud. For saving the lives of 2 fellow soldiers and maintaining medical readiness under sustained attack. Applause followed. I nodded, smiled, even said thank you, sir, in the steady voice they all expected from Sergeant Emma Lewis. But inside, I felt like I was floating 6 inches above my own skin. That night, I couldn't sleep. Again. The cot was too quiet. The walls too loud. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Bravo's lifeless body, Malik's blank stare, the shimmer of blood on Torres's scalp. I heard the explosion before it happened, felt the ground tremble again and again, smelled the burning tires, flesh, hair. I got up, walked out into the sand, stared up at the stars. No one teaches you what to do after you survive. They teach you how to fight, how to save, how to endure, but they don't tell you what to do when your body is fine and your soul feels fractured. I started snapping at people. I skipped meals, didn't answer Torres's messages from the recovery center. I kept my uniform perfect, my posture straight, my reports precise, but inside, I was unraveling quietly, efficiently. That's the thing about trauma. It doesn't shout. It whispers. Then it waits. A month after the ambush, I was called in for a routine psych evaluation. Just protocol. Dr. Abramson, a soft-spoken woman with wire glasses and sharp eyes, asked how I was coping. Fine, I said. Just tired. She didn't press, just nodded, then slid a card across the table. When fine stops working, she said, this line is open. I pocketed it. Never planned to call. But 3 nights later, after a dream where I was dragging Malik through sand that turned to fire, I dialed the number. Didn't speak. Just breathed. They stayed on the line for 17 minutes until I hung up. It helped. A little. Torres returned 2 weeks after. She limped into the barracks like a storm that refused to die quietly. Her leg was braced. Her face was pale. But her voice was loud and familiar. Well, she grinned. Someone kept my bunk warm. I blinked. Then for the first time in weeks I laughed. Not a polite chuckle. Not a performance. A real laugh. Sharp, ugly, healing. We hugged. She didn't ask what I'd been through. She didn't need to. We both knew silence sometimes said more than retelling ever could. I wrote a letter home that night. Not out of hope, just out of ritual. Dear Mom and Dad, I got a medal today. Bronze star. They say I saved lives. Maybe I did. Maybe I just did what anyone would have done in that canyon. But I carry more than a ribbon now. I carry echoes, smells, names. And I wonder if I mailed you this medal. Would you finally see me? Not as the daughter who rebelled, but as someone who stood between death and her team and didn't flinch. No need to reply. Emma. I didn't send it. Just folded it and placed it beside Andrew's journal. A new scar beside an old one. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the wire fences, Jenkins, now using a cane, returned to base. He found me near the motor pool. Elbows deep in routine maintenance I didn't need to be doing. Still trying to outrun ghosts? He asked. I shrugged. He sat beside me. You didn't just save my life. Doc, you gave me back something I thought I lost. I glanced at him. What's that? The belief that people still show up when it matters. That night, I stopped pretending I was fine. I signed up for counseling. I let Torres read my field notes. I admitted I needed time. I even cried once, fully, with no shame. Not because I was weak, but because I was strong enough to stop lying to myself. At the 6-month mark, Command asked if I wanted to rotate home. Early leave, commendation guaranteed, future in military medicine wide open. I thought about it, about going back to Boston, about walking into that cold, perfect house, about whether they'd even answer the door. Then I said, no, I still have work here, because healing doesn't mean escaping. Sometimes it means staying exactly where it hurts until it doesn't anymore. It came on a Tuesday tucked inside a plain envelope marked confidential. Most official correspondence arrives via internal digital channels. But this wasn't normal. The paper was thick, the language clipped and precise. To Sergeant Emma Lewis. Subject: temporary reassignment, immediate deployment order, location, classified, purpose, medical support for Special Operations Unit, Joint Task Force, Ghost Echo, directive. Report within 24 hours. No details, no map, no time for questions, just a signature at the bottom. White. Gun, R. K. Donovan. I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding slow but deep like distant artillery. Then I folded it, slid it into my chest pocket, and started packing. Torres caught me near the barracks gate. Where are you going? I hesitated. They need a medic, somewhere quiet. She narrowed her eyes. Since when does quiet come in a sealed envelope? I didn't answer. She didn't press. Instead, she wrapped me in a tight, one-armed hug. Come back, or I swear I'll haunt you. 48 hours later, I was airborne. The team was already assembled by the time I landed at the remote base, a mixture of SEALs, Rangers, and intelligence officers who looked like they were born in shadows. 12 personnel total. 1 medic, me. Their faces unreadable, their movements rehearsed. This wasn't war the way I'd known it. This was chess with blood. At briefing, the mission lead, Captain Reese Carter, outlined the operation. We've identified the location of 2 high-value targets, American hostages. One of them is a State Department official. The other, a captured aid worker with intel on planned attacks in Europe. The compound is buried in the Kunar Mountains. Light ground cover. High surveillance. Extraction window. 30 minutes. Failure means execution and global fallout. Silence. Then his eyes settled on me. You'll stay with the 2nd unit, by the evac point. When we secure the hostages, you move in, stabilize, prioritize, extract. I nodded. Copy that, sir. Night fell hard and fast in the mountains. We lifted off in blackout helicopters, flying low beneath the ridgelines. No lights, no chatter. Just the beating rotors and the sound of every person mentally preparing to die just in case. I checked my gear twice, then again. Packed 2 field kits, 4 tourniquets, double doses of pain suppressants, and a worn copy of Andrew's journal folded into my vest. You don't need luck, I told myself. You need clarity. Calm under fire. Hands that don't shake. At or 2, 43 local time. The first contact came in. Fire Team Bravo engaging. Light resistance. Push forward. Then static. Then gunfire. Then screaming. By the time our bird touched down near the extraction ridge, the radio was chaos. The primary evac chopper had taken a hit and rerouted. The ground team was under heavy fire. 1 hostage was down. The other wounded. 3 operators injured. 1 critical. Where's the medic? Someone yelled. Lewis. That's you. Go. I ran. Up loose gravel. Through the tree line. Toward the sound of bullets snapping past. Captain Carter met me halfway. Blood down 1 arm. His eyes wild. They're pinned. Hostage is shot. We need that artery clamped or we're losing her. I didn't wait for permission. The hostage female, late 30s. Civilian was pale and gasping. Gunshot through the lower abdomen. Bleeding fast. BP dropping. I dropped to my knees beside her. Ma'am, I'm your medic. I'm going to help you. Stay with me. All right. She nodded weakly. My hands moved on instinct. Clamp. Pressure pack. Field dressing. Stabilize the pelvis. Start IV. Administer fluids. Monitor vitals. Bullets zipped overhead. Dirt sprayed across my back. Someone was yelling coordinates into a radio. Someone else screamed in pain. But I kept going. Because that's what I do. I keep people alive in places built for death. We moved. Under cover of darkness and suppressive fire, I carried her between trees, slipping on loose rocks, my legs screaming from the strain. Captain Carter called for evacuee, voice hoarse. This is Eagle 1. Package secured. Médic en route. Requesting immediate lift. We reached the extraction ridge with seconds to spare. Rotor wash kicked up a sandstorm as the bird descended. I climbed aboard last, dragging a soldier with a shredded leg and blood soaking my front plate. Inside the chopper, I held the hostage's hand until she stabilized. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes. Are we safe? Not yet, I said, but we're going home. When we touched down, I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat on the tarmac, blood drying on my gloves, body aching from the weight of lives carried across fire. The commanding officer approached quietly. You did more than expected. I did what was necessary. He handed me another envelope. But this time, it wasn't a mission. It was an invitation. To Sergeant Emma Lewis. From Office of the Secretary of Defense. You are hereby requested to attend a recognition ceremony at the White House. The President of the United States will present you with the Distinguished Service Cross. I stared at the paper, fingers trembling now, not from fear, but disbelief. Andrew never got this far. I whispered. I looked up at the sky, cloudless, cold, and suddenly, unbearably bright. I arrived in D.C. at dawn. The sky was the color of clean paper, and the city still slept under its blanket of quiet. The taxi dropped me off outside the military guest housing, where a crisp uniform and a room key awaited pressed. Polished, impersonal. On the desk inside the room sat a formal folder marked White House Recognition Ceremony. Details enclosed. Inside, the event schedule, a map of the East Room, the seating chart, and a handwritten note in tight, elegant script. Your family has been informed and confirmed attendance. They will be seated in Section B. Office of Military Honors. I read that line 3 times, then folded the paper and placed it back in the envelope. That night, I walked alone near the National Mall, boots echoing on concrete, scarf wrapped tight against the early spring chill. I hadn't seen my parents in over 3 years. Not in person. Not even on a screen. We hadn't spoken, hadn't written, hadn't even exchanged a holiday formality. Now, they would watch me walk across a stage to receive the second highest military honor in the country. Not as their daughter, but as someone they once disowned. I wondered if they'd recognize me. Not physically, though. The scar on my temple and the strength in my gait were new. But the version of me I'd become, not built for grades, not groomed for prestige, but forged in fire, dust, and loss. The kind of woman who didn't ask permission anymore. The kind who saluted no one except those who'd earned it. The day before the ceremony, I got a call. Unknown number. Boston area code. I let it ring. Then, without quite meaning to, I picked up. Emma, my mother's voice. Familiar. Tentative. Laced with something I hadn't heard from her in years. Hesitation. We got the invitation, she said. It was unexpected. I said nothing. Your father and I will be there. Of course. Silence. Then she added, Is there anything you need from us? I almost laughed. The irony after years of silence, of rejection. Now they asked what I needed. No, I said, flatly. There's nothing I need. But I didn't hang up. And she didn't apologize. She only said, You look strong in the pictures they sent. Different. I replied. You don't know me anymore. We'd like to, that part. I didn't answer. Because that kind of wanting after so long comes too late. The morning of the ceremony, I dressed alone. Class A uniform, polished boots, ribbons and badges precisely aligned, hair pulled back in a tight, professional knot. In the mirror, I looked like a soldier, but beneath the layers, I still felt like a storm with a uniform wrapped around it. Not from fear, from everything that led to this moment. The deaths, the silence, the woman I had to become when no one stood behind me. At 0900, a black car arrived to escort me to the White House. We passed tourists, joggers, flagpoles, passed by all the places I had once only seen on textbooks or news. But today, I wasn't a visitor. I was being honored, not for my potential, not for my grades, not for what I might become, but for what I had done in real blood. On real ground, with real lives in the balance. Inside the East Room, everything gleamed. Chandeliers, gold trim, rows of polished chairs filled with dignitaries, generals, family members. The press stood quietly in the back, cameras poised like predators waiting for the right moment. And there, in Section B, third row, right side sat my parents. My father in a dark tailored suit, my mother in a muted blue dress, both stiff, straight-backed, eyes trained forward. I didn't wave. I didn't look twice. I took my seat among my fellow honorees, men and women who had also been forged in battle, who had bled and led and returned with more scars than stories. A Marine stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. Applause. Standing ovation. The Commander-in-Chief walked in tall, calm, presidential, and began to speak. We gather today not to glorify war, but to honor those who face its horrors so others don't have to. Today, we recognize Sergeant Emma Lewis for exceptional valor under fire during Operation Ghost Echo. I rose as my name was called, stepped forward, stood at attention. Sergeant Lewis provided critical care to 4 injured personnel, extracted a wounded hostage under live fire, and stabilized multiple casualties with limited resources. Her actions directly saved lives and prevented operational failure. In doing so, she exemplified not only the highest ideals of the U.S. Army Medical Corps but of this nation. He looked me in the eyes, then saluted. I returned the salute crisp, clean, unwavering. The Distinguished Service Cross was pinned to my chest. I didn't feel the weight of the medal. I felt the weight lift. Applause thundered across the East Room. I glanced toward Section B. My parents had stood too, faces unreadable. My mother had one hand over her heart. But I didn't smile at them, because this moment wasn't for them. It was for the girl who left home with nothing but a duffel bag and a promise to herself. I will become someone even if no one stays to see it. The ceremony ended with polite applause and camera shutters. High-ranking officials mingled with soldiers. Hors d'oeuvres floated on silver trays. Somewhere, a string quartet began to play something soft and forgettable. But I didn't hear it. I was walking toward the side exit, metal gleaming on my chest, legs steady beneath the weight of silence. Then I saw them, my parents, standing by the refreshment table like guests at a wedding they didn't plan to attend, holding glasses they didn't want to toast with. Their eyes locked on me as I approached. My father's jaw was tight, his tie slightly askew. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally, like all the control. All the precision she'd wielded for years had finally cracked, and she didn't know how to stand without it. Emma, she said first. Just my name, a sound too clean after years of absence. I stopped a few feet away. No salute, no smile, just stillness. We didn't know, she continued, voice softer now. About any of it? I nodded once, because you never asked. The words hung there, not angry. Not bitter, just truth. My father cleared his throat. Your actions? Today, they were real. I offered. Valuable, not a phase. He flinched slightly, not because I was cruel, but because I was right. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I raised a hand. You don't have to say anything. This moment doesn't require performance. They looked at me. Really. Looked. As if seeing the version of me that didn't fit into their pre-written biography. The version they'd erased when I chose my own path. I let the silence stretch. Not to punish. To allow them to feel what I had felt for years. The ache of not being met where you are. My mother stepped forward, slowly, like every inch was an apology. I kept your letters, she said. I just didn't know how to respond. I didn't ask why, because there's no good answer to why a parent chooses silence. I made a box, she continued, with your name on it, news articles, photos. I even printed out the metal citation when it leaked. She paused. Would you like to see it? I shook my head gently. No, because none of those things are me. They're what I did. And you missed who I was becoming long before any of that happened. She looked down. Shame or grief, I wasn't sure which. My father finally spoke, his voice low. We failed you. I let the words sit between us. Then I said, you didn't fail me by disagreeing with my path. You failed me when you made love conditional on which road I took. Silence again. No defense. No excuses. Just a quiet shift in posture, as if they were trying to hold up something that had already collapsed. Then my mother whispered, can we start again? And I said, calmly, not from where we left off, but maybe somewhere new? Eventually, not today, not tomorrow, but someday if they earned it. I stepped back, not away, just enough to reclaim space. I have people waiting, I said. People who showed up? My father nodded. We'll be here, if you ever need us. I don't, I said, but thank you for saying it. As I turned to leave, my mother reached into her bag, pulled out a small envelope. This was Andrew's. I froze. He wrote it before his last mission. It was addressed to you. We weren't going to send it, but you should have it now. I took it. Quietly, without a word. She didn't ask if I'd read it. I didn't promise that I would. We had already said everything we needed to without saying much at all. Back in the car, I sat still with the envelope in my lap. It was worn at the edges, slightly creased. My name on the front in his clean, unmistakable handwriting. I opened it slowly, breath held without meaning to. Inside. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I'm sorry. I wish I could see the person you've become, but more than that, I hope you chose a life that was yours, not theirs. Whatever you do, make it real, make it matter, and don't wait for permission to become who you are. P.S. If you're in uniform, damn, I always knew you'd be the bravest of us. With pride. I smiled through tears that finally fell freely, not from pain, from arrival, because somehow, even after death, my brother had seen me more clearly than my living parents ever had. That night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't drink. Didn't pose for photos. Didn't post on social media. I sat on a bench beneath a lamppost, holding that letter, and I let myself feel it all. The grief, the rage, the love, the pride, all of it tangled, messy, earned. Because becoming yourself isn't one decision. It's 1,000 silent choices when no one's watching. And I had made them all. 6 weeks after the ceremony, I was standing in front of a classroom, not in combat boots, not under gunfire, but in polished Oxfords, khakis, and a pressed shirt with my name embroidered in black thread. Sergeant E. Lewis Instructor, Amédée CNS, the Army Medical Department Center and School. I had been offered the position days after the award, recommended by 2 separate commanding officers who'd read my after-action reports and thought I had something more to give. You've seen things we can't teach. One of them said, it's time you pass it on. I said yes, not because I needed a break, but because I finally understood something Andrew once wrote. Legacy isn't what you do. It's what you teach others to carry when you're gone. My classroom was small, 12 students at a time, recruits with 2 big packs and eyes that still held more curiosity than trauma. Some were wide-eyed, fresh out of high school. Some had degrees. Some reminded me of myself proud, uncertain, running towards something they couldn't yet name. I didn't start with theory. I started with silence. Then I asked a single question. Do you know what it feels like to hold someone's heartbeat in your hands and know it's your decision whether it keeps going? They didn't answer. They didn't need to. They just listened. I taught them everything I knew, the textbook steps and the battlefield versions that never make it into manuals. how to keep your hands steady when the ground is shaking, how to make a tourniquet out of a rifle sling and hope, how to tell someone they'll make it even if you're not sure they will, how to grieve after saving someone and losing someone else. But more than that, I taught them how to hold space for fear, for failure, for the weight that comes after survival. One day, after a particularly intense trauma simulation, a student named Hale lingered behind. Quiet kid, smart, too hard on himself. Sergeant Lewis, he said. How do you know when you're ready? I looked at him and said, You're not. You never will be. You just show up anyway. That's what makes you ready. He nodded, didn't smile, but something in his shoulders relaxed. I kept the Bronze Star in a drawer, the Distinguished Service Cross in a box under my bed. But Andrew's journal, it stayed on my desk always. Some days, I read it aloud to the class. Not all of it, just pieces. When you give yourself to something bigger, the weight shifts. You start carrying your own name, not someone else's expectation. The students didn't always understand, not yet, but they listened like their lives depended on it. And one day they would. Outside of class, I walked the grounds, spoke at briefings, met with families. More than once, a parent would pull me aside and ask, Is this a good path for them? And every time, I answered, Only they can know. But if they're walking it with purpose, support them. Don't make your love conditional. Some parents nodded, silent. Some cried. Some never looked me in the eye again. That was okay, because I wasn't there to fix families. I was there to help build soldiers who wouldn't have to fix themselves alone. One morning, I received a package. No return address. Inside, a shadow box, glass pane, wood frame. Inside it, arranged carefully, the front page clipping of the award ceremony, a photo of me in uniform, saluting the president, a ribbon from my first field medic rotation, a note, handwritten in elegant script. I should have celebrated you all along. It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting, and I let the tears come. Not because I needed their pride, but because closure, sometimes, is quieter than forgiveness. That night, I hung the box above my desk, right next to Andrew's journal. I didn't call them, didn't write back, but I smiled, because I had built something without them and still left the door ajar. In the weeks that followed, I was asked to speak at multiple events, veteran panels, medical summits, women in uniform conferences. Every time, someone asked the same question. What was the moment that changed everything for you? And every time, I said, it wasn't one moment, it was 1,000. The first step onto the bus, the first letter I sent that no one read, the first life I saved, the first night I didn't sleep, the first time I bled, the first time I stood anyway. But if you're asking what made me whole, it was when I stopped asking my parents to see me and started seeing myself. It had been 5 years since I sat at that table. The dining room hadn't changed. Same crystal chandelier, same stiff-backed chairs, same polished mahogany that made every bite feel formal. But this time, something was different. Me. I wasn't the girl who walked out with a duffel bag and a broken heart. I wasn't the soldier begging to be seen. I was a woman who had stood on the battlefield and in front of the President of the United States. I had buried comrades, carried the wounded, taught the next generation, and now I was home. By choice. Not out of need, but out of closure. My mother had called 2 weeks prior. We're having Thanksgiving, she'd said. Just the 3 of us. If you're not deployed, we'd like you here. She didn't say please, but the silence around her sentence was softer than it used to be. I said I'd come, not for them, for myself, because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes, it looks like sitting across from the people who broke you and realizing they don't get to hold the same power anymore. I arrived 10 minutes early. Old habits. My father opened the door. No lecture, no measuring stare, just a quiet, "You look well." He stepped aside. Let me in. The house was spotless, as always. But now, it felt less like a museum and more like an attempt at something real. In the hallway, I saw something new. A shadow box hung beneath the family portraits. Inside, my army photo, a folded American flag, the Distinguished Service Cross citation, a quote, etched in gold. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. I stood there a long moment, not because I needed the display, but because I never thought they were capable of it. Dinner was quiet at first. Roast turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce arranged like a magazine spread. My mother poured wine with careful grace. "We weren't sure what you liked these days," she said. "This is fine," I replied. "I've eaten MREs in the desert. Anything with real salt is a luxury." She smiled, awkward, but sincere. Conversation wandered gently through safe topics. My work as an instructor, the recent snow in Boston, an article my father read on battlefield trauma care. Then, somewhere between the pumpkin pie and the second glass of wine, my mother said, "We should have come to your graduation." I looked up. She wasn't crying, but her hands clutched her napkin like it was anchoring her. "Not the White House," she added. "I mean, the first one, after basic. When you got your uniforme, we told ourselves you'd come back home eventually, that it was a phase, but we were wrong." I nodded once, not to agree, just to acknowledge that she'd said it. "It wasn't your absence that hurt," I said quietly. "It was your silence." My father cleared his throat. "I used to tell people you were traveling, studying abroad. I couldn't admit, not because I was ashamed of you, but because I didn't understand you. Do you now?" He paused. "I don't understand everything, but I respect it, and I respect you." That was as close to an apology as he'd ever given anyone. And somehow, it was enough. After dinner, my mother brought out a small wooden box. She set it on the table and slid it toward me. "We've been collecting these," she said. "Articles, photos, printouts of your letters, the ones I never sent back." Inside were clippings, some official, some blurry printouts from military forums, photos of me in training, a screenshot of a quote I gave during a veterans panel, a child's drawing that had made it into a care package, me in uniform, holding a big red heart. "I didn't know how to be your mother," she said. "Not when you chose a life I couldn't protect you from." "You didn't need to protect me," I said. "You just needed to stand beside me." She nodded, then reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. "This was your grandfather's," she said. "From World War II, a medic's pin, worn, tarnished at the edges, but still shining at the center. He would have been proud," she whispered. "I think he would have understood you better than we did." I took the pin, held it in my palm, and in that moment, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not erasure, but a softening like frost turning back to water. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, but when I stood to leave, my father said, "You don't have to wait 5 years next time." And I replied, "I won't. If I choose to come back, it'll be sooner, and it'll be my choice." He nodded. This time, no resistance, just quiet acceptance. Outside, the air was crisp. I walked slowly to the rental car, the wooden box tucked under one arm, my grandfather's pin clipped to the inside of my coat. The stars were sharp above, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to outrun a place to feel free. I had changed, but maybe they were trying to catch up. Freedom isn't loud. It's not medals, or applause, or viral headlines. It's quiet. It sounds like walking into a room without shrinking, like answering a question without justifying the truth, like waking up and no longer bracing for someone else's disapproval. It feels like air you didn't know you were holding, finally leaving your lungs. And it took me years and a war to find it. A few months after Thanksgiving, I stood in front of a new class of medics in training. Same room, same whiteboard, same faded poster of combat life-saving steps taped to the wall. But something inside me had shifted. Because now, I wasn't teaching from experience alone. I was teaching from healing. At the end of the lesson, a student raised her hand. "Sergeant Lewis," she said, "do your parents support what you do now?" The room went still. I smiled. "They came to a ceremony once," I replied. "They clapped. They nodded. They sent me photos of a medal display in their living room." The student blinked. "So, that means yes." I paused, then said, "Support isn't a moment. It's a pattern. Forgiveness isn't a sentence. It's a choice, sometimes daily. And love, well, real love is what remains when the performance stops." She nodded slowly, and in her eyes, I saw understanding, not full yet, but growing. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and Andrew's journal in my lap. The stars were out. The kind of sky that made you feel like the world was both too big and exactly enough. I flipped to the last blank page and wrote, "I'm not writing this for them anymore. Or for you, Andrew. I'm writing this for me, because I made it. I made peace with the version of me they never clapped for. And she, the stubborn, scared, fierce version, she's the one who saved me. I didn't need to be understood to be whole. I just needed to stop asking for permission to exist fully. And now I do." The next morning, I mailed that final page copied, not the original, to my parents. No letter attached. No signature. Just the message. I never asked if they received it. Never needed to know what they thought. Because the power wasn't in their reading it. The power was in me writing it. 1 year later, I visited Andrew's grave. Not in uniform. Not for Memorial Day. Just a random Tuesday. With a peanut butter sandwich and a flask of coffee, his old favorites. I sat beside the headstone and talked to him. Told him about my students. About Torres. Now training canine medics. About Jenkins. Walking without a cane. About Mom and Dad. Slowly trying. Then I read him his letter again. The one he wrote before his last mission. Make it real. Make it matter. I smiled. I did. Big brother. I promise you. I did. When I left the cemetery, I didn't look back. Not out of coldness, but because some goodbyes don't need glances. Some goodbyes are just a door gently closed, and the light still on inside. That night, I gave a speech at a veterans event. Nothing scripted, just a room of soldiers, families, and too many stories wearing too few words. I stepped up to the mic, took a breath, and said, "I once thought freedom was being seen by the people who never really looked. Now I know freedom is seeing yourself, and no longer waiting for them to catch up. You don't need a stage or a medal. You just need one thing: the courage to belong fully to yourself, even if no one claps when you arrive. If you're here today healing, grieving, rebuilding, you've already done the hardest part. You didn't give up. So don't look back waiting for permission. Look forward and build forward." As I stepped down, someone clapped, then another, then the whole room. But this time, it wasn't for validation. It was just a sound I happened to hear, not a need I was chasing. Because finally, I was free, and I had saved myself. Each episode is a slow burn of suspicion, sorrow, and strength. And when justice finally comes, it doesn't knock, it shatters. Are you ready to listen to the next voices that were silenced? Subscribe now to step into tales where the wounds are real, the pain is raw, and the revenge is unforgettable.